A Storm in Flanders by Winston Groom is a very brief history of World War I. In fact, it's way less than 300 pages long. It was written by Winston Groom. Now, you recall, he's the Forrest Gump guy. He had written several histories before focusing on certain aspects of the Civil War, and plus he wrote several group biographies of people connected to World War II. All of his work is very, very readable, and by that I mean it moves as smoothly as fiction, but the kind of fiction that you really can't put down. Now you're asking yourself, how was he able to condense a subject that's as big as the First World War into something as short as this? Well, he did it by adopting a single, narrow focal point that gave him a framework on which he could hang a lot of the significant stuff about that war. And that focal point was the fighting in a place called the Ypres Salient. That's in Flanders. What was the Ypres Salient? It was a stretch of real estate in Belgium that was about maybe 13 miles long and 3 miles deep. For you New Yorkers, that's less than the distance from the Battery to Yonkers. By comparison, the entire Western Front was 400 miles long. That's 13 out of 400. And of course, there were other fronts in the war too. Now, little as it was, it accounted for an outsized portion of the death and destruction in the war as a whole. Let me break that little chestnut down for you. There were about 9 million battle deaths in the war as a whole. Of those 9 million, 550,000 were in the Ypres Salient, that little 13-mile strip. Now, if you count total casualties in Ypres, not just deaths, there were well over 1 million. It's just extraordinary. First off, the fighting there lasted practically the entire war, but geography gives the major reason for these numbers. The salient was nothing more than a bulge in the Allied line. Because it jutted out into the German line, it could be hit from 3 sides. The Brits were in the middle of this bulge, surrounded by Germans on those 3 sides, and the Germans held all the high ground around the salient. On top of that, the ground in the middle was a swamp. Pretty hard to imagine a more deadly killing zone. By narrowing his focus to Ypres, Groom ends up mainly talking about the Brits and the Germans. The Belgians and the French play pretty small supporting roles in the whole thing here. And of course, there's practically no discussion of the war at sea, the Russians, the Austrians, the Turks, the Italians. Americans come into the picture at the end, but to all intents and purposes, this is a British show. Now, even though he's got this laser focus on this part of Belgium, he's able to get into a lot of other subjects. Take military technology. He explains the impact, the introduction and impact of things like machine guns, artillery, tanks, flamethrowers, and poison gas. On top of that, he gets into top-deck politics, strategy. And of course, in a big way, he gets into the human side of the fighting. And between you and me, that is gruesome in the extreme. You actually get a feeling in your gut for the misery, the chaos, the confusion that ordinary soldiers went through. Look, I'm not going to say that this book is a substitute for a really comprehensive military history of the First World War. Something like that would be John Keegan's book, which was great. But this little book is a great overall appreciation for the war, I think, and especially for Americans, because we don't tend not to pay a lot of attention to that war. So who's the book for? Well, certainly anybody who doesn't know very much about World War I but would like to know more. And somebody who knows something about it might well appreciate this as a kind of refresher on the subject. Now, I'm recommending this book by Winston Groom because it is so good. Give it a try. A Storm in Flanders, Winston Groom. Now, I'll tell you what, I'd really appreciate your comments and your suggestions. But in the meantime, this has been my recommendation for this Sunday.